Hey guys. Tonight we're traveling back to a time when comfort was a luxury and cold was a constant companion. Imagine you've just stepped into a medieval castle, its walls thick and gray, its corridors echoing with the faint drip of melting frost. The air tastes of damp stone and smoke, the kind that clings to your cloak and hair for days. You think winter in your apartment is rough? Try surviving January without insulation, glass windows, or central heating. Honestly, you probably wouldn't last a week. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive at the gates of a stone keep, your supposed refuge from the biting cold. The drawbridge creaks beneath your boots, stiffened by frost. The first breath you take inside isn't much warmer. The castle walls, 3 feet thick, have absorbed months of winter and now exhale it back like a sigh of ancient misery. You see your breath plume into the air, and you realize that the fire blazing in the great hall doesn't reach the drafty corridor where you stand. You walk slowly, watching your shadow flicker against the torchlight. The place feels half alive, echoing footsteps, distant barking of dogs, the faint sound of a harp. Somewhere above, a shutter slams in the wind. You tug your cloak tighter. No one told you medieval castles were designed less for comfort and more for defense. Those tall towers? Perfect for spotting enemies, terrible for trapping heat. A steward greets you, squinting beneath a hood. The Lord is away, he mutters, but you may stay in the East Tower. Near the kitchen passage, you thank him, trying to sound grateful, but your toes have already gone numb. The East Tower, right beside the outer wall, was probably chosen because it's expendable if the place gets attacked. Warmth clearly wasn't part of the deal. You make your way there, passing tapestries fluttering like sails with every draft. The air smells faintly of tallow candles and wet wool. Beneath the stairs, a servant girl is spreading rushes on the floor, fresh straw mixed with herbs like lavender and rosemary. To keep out the damp, she says, smiling briefly before scurrying away. You'll later realize it's not for comfort, it's to mask the smell of mold and waste that seeps through the cracks. Your chamber door groans open. The room beyond is small, with a narrow slit for a window, barely wide enough to let in light, yet generous enough to welcome icy air. The bed looks inviting from afar, but when you touch the linen, it's stiff with cold. A single candle flickers beside it, doing its best to impersonate the sun. You drop your pack and kneel by the fireplace, a small, square opening blackened with soot. There's no chimney, just a hole cut into the stone above to let the smoke escape. You light a handful of kindling, and within minutes, the smoke curls into your face. Medieval innovation, you think, coughing. As your fire struggles for life, you study the stones around you. Each block is uneven, with mortar that's seen better centuries. The walls aren't meant to keep warmth in, they're meant to withstand sieges, arrows, and boredom. Heat escapes faster than gossip in a noble court. You pull your cloak tighter and recall a strange tip from the steward. Sleep in the corner opposite the door. The draft goes straight through. You test it with your hand, The air near the door feels like a ghost brushing past. So you drag the straw mattress, position it under the window slit, and hope the cold prefers the other side of the room tonight. You think about all those romantic movies with cozy castle fires. Lies. In reality, smoke gathers under the rafters. Soot rains down like dirty snow. And your eyes sting until you look like you've cried over a tragic ballad. Even the nobles upstairs aren't much better off, sure. Their beds are canopied, but that's mostly to stop spiders and drips from the ceiling. The castle is a symphony of creaks and whispers. Somewhere, a dog growls. Somewhere else, a guard sneezes, his echo bouncing through the stairwell. The sound makes you shiver not from fear but empathy. You imagine him standing on the battlements, wrapped in furs, trying not to think about how long till dawn. You pull your hands close to the fire and breathe into them. The warmth feels fleeting, fragile. For a moment, you wonder how people did this every winter of their lives. How they endured the months when water froze in buckets and frost patterned their bedclothes. You realize that survival here isn't about comfort, it's about rhythm. Knowing when to close the shutters, when to bank the fire, when to huddle near the kitchen for stolen heat. As the wind sighs against the tower walls, you lay back and stare at the beams above. They creak like they're whispering old secrets. You can almost hear the lives of those who slept here before you, knights, servants, maybe a musician whose hands froze before he finished his song. Sleep comes slowly, like a truce between body and cold. But just as your eyes begin to close, you hear it. A faint drip of water somewhere behind the wall. Then another. You smile faintly. At least it's not rats. Yet. The candle burns low. The fire turns to embers. And the castle exhales again. A breath of history. Of frost. Of centuries of people just like you. Trying to outlast the cold. And you, the latest guest in this timeless chill, drift into uneasy dreams beneath a ceiling of groaning beams and whispering wind. Wondering if warmth is just another myth the Middle Ages invented. The morning doesn't so much arrive as it sneaks in, gray, reluctant, and cold enough to make your teeth chatter before you even open your eyes. The faint light that leaks through the window slit looks more like diluted milk than sunlight. Your breath clouds above your face in lazy swirls, and the first sound you hear is a dull thud somewhere in the courtyard, wood being chopped. You guess, someone's up before dawn, feeding the hungry hearths that keep the Lord's family from freezing solid. You sit up, your joints creaking louder than the floorboards. The embers in your little fireplace are pale ghosts of last night's flame. You prod them with a stick, but they crumble into gray dust. The chill moves in immediately, wrapping around you like a wet cloak. You curse softly. If only you'd known about banking the fire. That's the trick, apparently. Covering the embers with ash before bed to keep them alive till morning. It's the medieval version of a space heater. Except your heater occasionally fills the room with smoke and asphyxiates the careless. You pull on your boots, still damp from yesterday, and step into the corridor. It's like walking into the mouth of winter itself. The air is sharp and thin, biting at your nose. Somewhere below, the smell of wood smoke drifts upward, faintly comforting but too far away to help you now. You follow the sound of footsteps toward the great hall. It's not hard to find, It's the only place in the castle that sounds remotely alive. The heavy doors are open just enough to let a ribbon of warmth leak through. Like a promise, you slip inside. The sight hits you. A single massive hearth dominating the far wall. Flames leaping high, shadows dancing across beams blackened by centuries of smoke. The heat doesn't spread evenly, oh no. That would be too convenient. The people closest to the fire roast like chestnuts, while those at the edges might as well be sitting in the forest. You join the crowd halfway, just close enough to thaw your fingers without catching fire. The hall smells of wood resin, wet wool, and the faint tang of roasting meat, probably something small and unidentifiable. A few servants hurry past, arms full of firewood, their faces glow red from exertion, breath puffing like steam engines. You try to catch one's attention and ask how often they feed the hearth. Every hour, he says, and every hour it eats it all. You can't help but grin. The fire's an insatiable beast, and the castle is its endless stomach. The noblemen sit nearest the blaze, layered in velvet and fur, drinking ale even this early. One of them laughs, slapping another on the shoulder, his ring flashing in the firelight. You notice the back of his chair gleams more than the front, because it's been scorched smooth over years of use. Meanwhile, the servants hover near the walls, rubbing their hands, pretending not to envy the Lord's warmth. You find a spot near a side brazier, a portable metal bowl filled with glowing coals. It doesn't heat much, but it tricks your body into hope. A woman sits nearby, spinning wool, her fingers moving quickly despite the chill. She smiles when she catches your eye. Best sit close, traveler. The fire's fickle today. You nod, watching as she deftly shifts the coals to keep them glowing. She tells you that in some castles, they dig pits in the floor and fill them with embers, covering them with sand, primitive underfloor heating. You raise a brow. Did it work? She laughs, sometimes, until someone stepped in the wrong place. The conversation warms you as much as the coals do. She tells you of her husband, who tends fires in the kitchen, and how they use a trick called the long burn, layering logs so that the bottom catches slowly and lasts through the night. If the ash is thick, she says, you'll wake to warmth. If not, she shrugs, you'll wake to regret. You imagine the kitchen, a place of perpetual heat, sizzling pots, and dripping candles. Maybe later, you'll sneak there just to thaw your bones properly. For now, the hall is enough. Above, the rafters are black with soot. And you realize something strange: chimneys, as you know them, barely exist yet. Most of the smoke curls lazily into the rafters and escapes through holes in the roof or small vents. It's a miracle the whole place doesn't burn down weakly. You cough as a gust of wind sends a cloud of soot raining down. A noblewoman sneezes delicately and waves her handkerchief like it's the smoke's fault for existing. You smirk. Some things never change. Privilege. For one. A steward enters, banging a staff on the floor. Firewood delivery delayed, he announces, as though he's declaring war. Groans ripple through the hall. Apparently, the cart got stuck in the frozen mud road, and the stores are running low. Someone mutters. Again, you can almost hear the collective shiver. You think about the fragile balance this whole system depends on. Every log burned is one less for tomorrow. Every ember must be coaxed, fed, nurtured, Fire, here, isn't a luxury, it's survival strategy. Politics and daily labor all rolled into one. You glance toward the high table, where the Lord's chair sits empty. Maybe he's off hunting, or visiting another estate with better insulation. Either way, the absence feels significant because power, in these walls, radiates like heat, strongest near the center, fading to nothing at the edges. As you sip a mug of small ale, warm, weak, but blessedly drinkable, you realize something deeper. Warmth in a medieval castle isn't just about fire. It's about proximity to the hearth, to power, to others. You stay warm by staying close, literally and socially. A boy runs past, giggling, and drops a stick into the brazier, sparks jumping like fireflies. The woman beside you scolds him gently, then smiles at you again. That's life here, she says. You feed the fire, or the cold feeds on you. You watch the flames lick upward, hear the wind press against the shutters, and feel the stone under your boots. Ancient and unyielding, somewhere, deep in the walls, you think you hear the low moan of trapped air, like the castle itself breathing in the cold. You stand, stretch, and decide to explore, maybe find a warmer corner, or at least learn where the warmth hides when it isn't here. You pull your cloak close and step back into the corridor, smoke still clinging to your hair, your skin tingling with that strange, temporary heat that feels more like memory than comfort. The castle exhales again, and you walk straight into its breath. The warmth from the great hall lingers on your skin like a pleasant lie as you step back into the corridor. The instant the heavy oak doors close behind you, the air bites again, sharp, dry, merciless. The stone beneath your boots feels colder than before, as though it has been waiting all morning just to test your endurance. You pull your cloak tight around your shoulders, your breath a small cloud of defiance. The castle seems quieter now. Only the faint hum of daily life breaks the silence, a hammer striking metal somewhere in the courtyard, a broom scraping across flagstones, a distant cough echoing off the walls. Every sound feels amplified by the emptiness. You begin to notice how the architecture itself conspires against warmth. Stone, you realize, is not your friend. It stores cold like a miser hoards gold. The walls, so proud and thick, bleed away heat faster than you can create it. You run your gloved hand along the rough surface. Frost sparkles in the mortar. You think of modern houses with insulation and radiators. Medieval builders would have called that witchcraft. Back then, comfort ranked far below defense. You wander deeper through the keep, following a narrow passage that twists like a frozen vein through the castle's belly. Every corner holds a draft, an invisible enemy that waits to strike exposed skin. It sneaks up sleeves, down collars, up pant legs, relentless. You duck your head and press on. At one corner, a servant is wedged against the wall, stuffing dried moss and bits of wool into cracks between the stones. He glances up briefly, nods, and mutters something about keeping the devil's breath out. You ask how well it works. Better than prayers, he says. You're not sure he's joking. Further ahead, a window slit lets in a ghostly shaft of light, and an even stronger gust of wind. You step closer, examining the narrow opening. It's built for archers, not warmth. Wide inside, narrow outside, so defenders could shoot arrows without becoming easy targets. But those clever angles also invite cold air to whistle straight through. You can almost imagine it giggling as it passes your ear. You lean against the wall and watch your breath turn to fog. The cold has texture here, almost alive. You remember the steward's words from yesterday. Every stone has its own wind. You thought he was being poetic. Now you suspect he was just tired of sealing the same gaps every winter. Down another corridor, you find a small wooden door cracked open just enough to let out a faint, delicious heat. You push it gently. The room beyond glows golden from a brazier in the center, the flames licking through holes in an iron grate. 2 guards sit beside it, boots off, steaming socks hanging from their spears. "Lost, are you?" One of them grins. His teeth look like old tombstones. You nod and step inside, savoring the stolen warmth. "This tower's got the worst drafts in the place," the other says, tossing a chunk of coal into the brazier. "Cold comes straight off the river. We stuff the arrow slits with straw, but it sneaks in through the floor." You crouch near the fire, listening. The wind outside howls, a low mournful note that seems to circle the keep endlessly. One guard spits into the coals. "We joke it's the ghosts," he says, "knights who froze to death standing watch." You smile thinly, unsure if you should laugh or knock on wood. "Tell me," you ask, "how do you sleep through this cold?" He shrugs. "You don't. You just get used to waking up alive." The brazier crackles, sending a few sparks drifting upward like tiny stars. You stare into it, mesmerized, then notice the patterns of soot on the ceiling, dark trails that climb toward the vent hole. The guards explain that without proper chimneys, the smoke just curls around until it finds an exit. Sometimes it doesn't, and the whole room fills up. "We lose more guards to smoke than to raiders," one mutters, only half in jest. You glance toward the arrow slit again. Someone has wedged a slab of leather over it, tied with strips of cloth. It trembles each time the wind hits. Ingenious, you think, in a desperate sort of way. When you stand to leave, the guard tosses you a half-burned stick. "Take it," he says. "Hot end's dead, but the other side's warm enough to fool your fingers." You grin, tuck it into your glove, and thank him. As you step back into the corridor, the difference is instant. The warmth left behind like a dream fading in daylight. You walk slowly, tracing your path deeper into the castle's maze. The passage narrows again, walls pressing close, their chill brushing your shoulders. You begin to see the logic of medieval living, everyone crowded near the fire not for companionship, but survival. The great hall, the kitchens, the guardroom, they're not just places of duty. They're refuges against the cold tyranny of stone. The rest of the castle is a tundra dressed in architecture. You reach a spiral staircase. The steps are uneven, each one worn smooth by centuries of boots. Cold air rises from below, carrying a damp scent of mildew and stone. As you climb, your torch flickers, struggling against the drafts. Halfway up, you pause and glance out another arrow slit. The landscape beyond is bleak, a forest of skeletal trees and snow like crushed glass under a pale sky. You imagine riders trudging through that, cloaks stiff with frost, praying the drawbridge is down by the time they reach it. You keep climbing, The stairwell twists tighter until your hand brushes the icy central column. Every breath echoes, every sound muffled by stone. It's like being inside the throat of some enormous, frozen beast. When you finally emerge into an upper corridor, a faint light greets you, sunlight at last. Watery and thin, you push open a shutter, the hinges shrieking in protest. The light floods in briefly before the wind slaps you in the face. You laugh despite yourself. Medieval ventilation, aggressive, unpredictable, and entirely unsympathetic. You close the shutter again, sealing the world outside. Behind you, the corridor stretches into shadow. Somewhere down there, a door creaks, and you hear soft footsteps. Maybe a servant, maybe just the castle settling. Either way, you wrap your cloak tighter, whispering to the stone, "You win this round." The cold answers with silence, the smug kind only ancient walls can manage. The castle never truly sleeps. But it does fall quiet, the kind of quiet that hums in your bones. By midday, you've learned that surviving here isn't about finding warmth. It's about trapping it, hoarding it, bribing it to stay just a little longer. You return to your little room to test what the guards mentioned last night, ceiling drafts. The shutters rattle, groaning against the wind like an old drunk refusing to leave the tavern. You push them tight, then wedge a strip of linen in the gaps. It helps, but not much. Cold has 1,000 doorways. You crouch by the hearth again, coaxing a reluctant flame from twigs and dry rushes. Smoke curls up, hesitant, before diving straight into your face. You wave it away, blinking tears. You've read somewhere, or maybe someone told you, that medieval people considered smoke part of daily life. A free seasoning for lungs and walls alike. And right now, your room tastes well seasoned indeed. When the fire catches, the difference is immediate but local, a small radius of mercy in a sea of chill. You warm your hands, listening to the wood snap. For a moment, it's almost cozy. You imagine medieval families doing this every evening, sitting together, sharing a single source of light and heat, telling stories or prayers, a reminder that warmth wasn't just physical, it was communal. Then you remember that if you're alone, the warmth has no reason to linger. You decide to explore again, carrying a small candle like a badge of courage. The corridor twists left into what looks like a servant's passage. The air smells faintly of smoke, onions, and something burning, which is, oddly, encouraging. It means life. You follow the scent until you reach a half-open door. Inside, a brazier glows in the center of a round chamber. Two maids are crouched near it, balancing a small pot on an iron trivet. They glance up, startled at first, then smile when they see you shivering like a leaf in a storm. Lost? One asks. Cold, you admit. They chuckle and gesture for you to sit. You lower yourself onto a stool near the brazier. The heat radiates through your boots, flooding up your legs until your body sighs with relief. What are you cooking? You ask. Vinegar and rosemary, one replies. Keeps the air clean. You arch a brow. Does it? She grins. No, but it smells less like wet dog that way. You laugh, a brittle, happy sound in the cold air. They explain how the castle's smoke problem sometimes gets so bad that servants carry braziers around to chase the chill between rooms. You can't let the fire die, says the older one. The cold always waits outside. Always. You watch the flames dance in the shallow bowl. Small but determined. Why not build more chimneys, you ask? Oh, they tried, she says, stirring the pot. Some caught fire. Others collapsed. Once, the Lord's brother nearly roasted himself in bed when the flue turned wrong. You nod, trying not to picture that. It's strange, for all its grandeur. The medieval castle is a flawed design. It's both fortress and freezer. The younger maid tells you that some people hung damp cloths near the fire to trap smoke and heat, a sort of early filter. You imagine a row of linen sheets fluttering in the glow, absorbing soot like sacrifices to domestic science. As they talk, you start noticing how the warmth collects unevenly. The brazier's side nearest the wall is toasty, while the far side stays cool. You test it with your hand. Air moves. The older maid explains. Fire teaches you that. The trick is to block what steals it. She tosses a handful of ashes over the coals. Dimming them slightly keeps them alive longer, she says. Ash protects the heat beneath. You file that away. One of 100 tiny lessons these people learned just to exist. When you finally stand to leave, your skin hums with the memory of warmth. Thank you, you say. The younger maid shrugs. Don't thank us. Thank the fire. We only borrow it. You step back into the corridor, and the cold pounces immediately. Jealous and quick, but now, you feel different. You've seen its weakness. You've learned that survival here is all about management, not of wealth or soldiers, but of temperature. You retrace your steps toward the great hall. Along the way, you pass a small arched window, rimmed with frost. You touch it, tracing the patterns like veins under glass. Outside, snow drifts down in lazy spirals. Indifferent and endless. You shiver, but not entirely from cold. There's something humbling in realizing that this, for centuries, was simply life. A rat darts across the floor, pausing just long enough to look at you with what feels like judgment. You can almost hear it saying, "You think you're the first to freeze here?" Then it vanishes into the wall. You reach the hall again. The fire is smaller now. More embers than flame. A few people linger nearby, talking softly, wrapped in cloaks and fatigue. One man pokes the coals absently, muttering about drafts from the devil's armpit. You decide that's the most accurate weather report ever delivered. You find a seat near the hearth. Let the orange light wash over your face, and breathe in the smoke that never quite leaves the air. For all its discomfort, there's something anciently beautiful about this scene. The glow of fire on stone. The rhythm of crackle and whisper. The simple persistence of people refusing to surrender to the elements. Outside, the wind howls again. Inside, the coals whisper their own lullaby. You close your eyes, the warmth sinking deep, temporary. Imperfect, but enough. Somewhere, beyond the flickering light, a bell tolls for evening prayers. The day is fading, and the castle prepares for another night of careful survival. Evening presses its weight upon the castle again. Gray light thinning into blue. You can feel it in your bones, not just the cold, but the rhythm of survival settling in. You've started to understand what keeps people alive here, not hope, not prayer, but layers. Layers of everything: stone, wool, and willpower. You sit on the edge of your straw-stuffed bed, surrounded by an organized chaos of garments. Linen, wool, fur, all piled like the spoils of a laundry war. The castle's air is so damp you can smell the fabric before you even touch it. Earthy. Faintly sour. Alive. The first layer is linen. Thin, breathable, scratchy only when it's clean, which is never. You slip it over your head and shiver as it brushes your skin. The fabric feels cold at first, but it's your secret weapon. Linen wicks moisture away, keeps you from freezing in your own sweat. In this climate, that's not comfort, that's survival. Next comes wool. Heavy, coarse, stubborn. It smells faintly of sheep and smoke. You drape it over your shoulders. Then pull on a pair of hose that resist movement like an argument. Somewhere, you imagine a tailor in the 13th century chuckling. Fashion hurts. You layer again, another tunic. A thick cloak lined with rabbit fur. Each edition dulls your sense of touch but sharpens your odds of waking up tomorrow without frostbite. You realize that medieval life wasn't about freedom, it was about containment. Warmth was something you trapped, like a secret. In the corner of the room, a small mirror made of polished bronze catches the flicker of your candle. The reflection shows a bundled figure. Unrecognizable. You grin despite yourself. You look less like a castle guest and more like a walking laundry pile. Somewhere deep inside, you can hear modern sensibilities screaming for central heating. You open the shutter a crack. Outside, snow drifts lazily past the slit window. The flakes glint in the candlelight before disappearing into darkness. You close it quickly. A single breath of outside air undoes half an hour of layering. A knock startles you. It's a young servant with red cheeks and straw in her hair. Carrying a folded bundle. The laundress said you might need this. She says, handing it over. It's another cloak, rough and patched. You thank her, and she shrugs. Winter doesn't ask who's noble, she says before darting away. You unfold the cloak and notice something odd, faint stitching at the hem. A pattern of spirals and tiny crosses. For luck, you murmur, or maybe for insulation. In a place like this, the two often overlap. You remember what one of the guards said earlier. We stuff straw in our boots and call it fashion. You decide to test it. The floor feels like ice beneath your bare soles. You gather straw from the rushes on the floor, shove handfuls into each boot, and slip them back on. It's not elegant, but it's genius. Your toes sigh with relief. You step toward the hearth. The fire's low again, sulking like a neglected pet. You nudge it awake with a stick. Adding more wood, the flames catch slowly, licking the air with a warm orange tongue. You hold your hands close, then turn to warm your back, then your sides, like some kind of human rotisserie. The warmth seeps through the layers slowly, and with it comes an odd peace. You think about how people once called this normal. The daily ritual of dressing for battle against the weather. In summer, they'd peel layers away like bark. In winter, they'd bury themselves alive in cloth. There's a knock of wind against the door. You glance toward it, the latch trembles, but holds. A tiny draft snakes across the floor, brushing your ankles. Even here, the cold always finds you. You glance at the fur lining your cloak, soft, dark, worn thin in spots. Somewhere, someone trapped and skinned a dozen creatures to keep a noble alive through a single winter. You imagine the furriers at work, boiling hides, scraping, sewing, You wonder if they ever grew numb to the smell. Outside, a bell rings again, the signal for curfew. Fires are to be banked. Doors barred. Prayers muttered. You pull another blanket around yourself and sit cross-legged near the hearth. The candle beside you trembles in the draft. Its flame fighting the air just as you are. You think of how different warmth must have felt then, not casual. Not expected, but sacred. To share heat was to share life. Lovers, friends, even rivals huddled together not from affection, but necessity. The cold was the great equalizer. You wrap the final layer around your shoulders and close your eyes. The wool scratches your neck. The fur smells faintly of smoke. And your breath fogs in front of you before fading into nothing. The fire pops. The wind hums. And the stone walls listen, silent, ancient, unbothered. If you could whisper back to them, you might say, "I understand now." Because in a medieval castle, survival isn't about conquering the cold. It's about outlasting it, quietly, stubbornly, one layer at a time. The castle wakes before dawn again. Though wakes might be generous. No one ever truly sleeps in this cold. Every hour the fire fades. And every hour someone shuffles to stir it back to life. You rise with stiff fingers. Your breath forming pale ghosts above the straw mattress. The embers in your hearth glow faintly, like eyes watching you from the dark. You kneel, add kindling, and whisper encouragements as though the fire can hear. When it finally catches, a slow orange bloom spreads across the stone. You feel it crawl into your skin, hesitant but alive. The smell of smoke and singed straw fills the air. Home. Medieval style. Your bed is little more than a wooden frame stuffed with straw, covered by a coarse blanket and a heap of wool. But you're starting to see the logic. Warmth is about layering. Even in sleep, you fluff the straw with your hands, noticing how the dry stalks creak and shift. The air inside warms slightly from your movement. It's the medieval equivalent of fluffing a duvet, only louder and less glamorous. Someone once told you that nobles slept on feather beds while servants used straw ticks. You used to think that sounded romantic. Now, you just picture feathers escaping at midnight, drifting through the cold like tiny traitors. You pull back the blanket and find the stones you placed near the fire last night still faintly warm. You roll them in a bit of cloth and tuck them under the blanket's edge. A crude hot water bottle. Perhaps, but it works. The warmth spreads through the bed slowly, like sunlight sneaking into a room. You lie down, test the heat, and grin. Primitive comfort has its charm. Outside your door, footsteps echo, someone carrying logs. The castle breathes its usual morning sigh, smoke rising through cracks. Pots clattering, distant voices in prayer. You step into the corridor and follow the sounds toward the kitchen. The air grows warmer as you descend the narrow stairway. You pass servants hauling baskets of kindling, each person wrapped in layers that make them look more cloth than human. The smell of burning oak thickens, rich and comforting. When you push open the heavy kitchen door, a wave of heat greets you like an embrace. The room glows gold with firelight. Huge iron pots hang over roaring flames. Spits creak as meat turns slowly. Dripping fat that hisses when it hits the coals. The floor is warm, the walls are damp, and the air is heavy with steam. You stand there, half blinded by the sudden change. And exhale. You've found the castle's heart, the only place where warmth doesn't have to be begged for. A cook with flour-streaked cheeks barks orders while stirring a pot the size of a cauldron. Don't just stand there, she says when she spots you. If you're cold, make yourself useful. You step forward instinctively. She hands you a ladle, points at a smaller pot bubbling with something that smells faintly of barley and onions. Stir that, and don't scrape the bottom, we like it thick. You obey, grinning. The heat of the fire seeps into your hands, your face, your soul. What is it? You ask. Pottage, she says. Same as yesterday, same as tomorrow. Keeps the cold out, if not the boredom. You glance around the room. Servants move like a practiced orchestra, turning spits, hauling buckets, slicing roots. Every few seconds, someone opens the oven doors and the air surges with waves of heat. It's chaos, but it's glorious. You realize the kitchen isn't just where food happens, it's where survival is cooked daily. The cook ladles you a small bowl of pottage, thick, brown, steaming. You take a cautious sip. It tastes decent, earthy, comforting. She chuckles at your expression. It's better than snow. You notice barrels of ale lined up against the far wall. A servant fills a jug and takes a gulp before handing it to another. For hydration, he says with a wink. You take a small sip yourself. The ale is weak, almost sour, but it's safe. Water in these walls is a gamble. You glance upward at the soot-darkened ceiling. Smoke curls through holes in the roof, gathering in strange patterns. You cough. Doesn't it ever choke you? You ask. Only on feast days, the cook says. Then we just open the doors and let the cold join us. You laugh. It's hard not to admire the pragmatism. After breakfast, you linger near the fire, reluctant to leave. The warmth from the kitchen hearth is different, it's alive, constantly fed by motion, noise, and human stubbornness. For a fleeting moment, you almost forget how cold the rest of the castle is. But eventually, duty, or curiosity, calls. You thank the cook, hand back the ladle, and step outside. The door shuts behind you, sealing the heat in, and the chill pounces instantly. Your breath fogs in front of your face. You stand there, arms folded, watching frost reclaim your cloak like a slow curse. You think of the cooks and servants who work all day in that heat, only to return to cold chambers at night. Warmth, here, isn't a gift, it's a shift. You earn it, hour by hour, with labor and sweat. The corridor hums faintly, the stones whispering as they cool again. You pull your hood low and head back toward your room, the smell of smoke still clinging to your clothes. Behind you, the kitchen fires roar on, greedy, relentless, beautiful. And as you walk, you realize something quietly profound. In this world, warmth doesn't last, but neither does the cold. Everything moves in cycles: fire, frost, breath, life. The trick is to keep the flame going, one spark at a time. By now, you've learned that warmth in a castle is a moving target. It gathers in the strangest corners and vanishes just when you start to relax. You start hunting for it like a medieval treasure, and today's prize lies behind a thick oak door at the far end of the corridor, the kitchen's hearth, where fire and life collide. When you push the door open again, you're greeted by a wave of delicious chaos. The kitchen is already alive with movement, wooden spoons clattering, Dogs darting between legs, steam fogging the air until the entire room feels like a living creature breathing out heat. You step inside and the warmth hugs you like an old friend who smells faintly of onions and smoke. Back again? The cook calls out without looking up. She's wielding a wooden spoon like a scepter, stirring something thick and brown in a cauldron that could double as a bathtub. Couldn't keep away, could you? You grin. It's the only place that feels like heaven. She snorts. If heaven smells like burnt barley and sweat, you're in luck. You edge closer to the fire. The great stone hearth dominates the wall, big enough to roast an ox or hide a secret or two. Iron hooks dangle from chains, holding pots that bubble with promise. Sparks leap into the air, glowing briefly before fading into the smoky haze that coats everything in a thin film of soot. A small boy crouches by the side, fanning coals with a piece of wood shaped like a paddle. His hair is wild, his face streaked black. Kitchen imp, the cook calls him, half affectionate, half warning, keeps the flame alive. If he falls asleep, we all freeze by morning. You squat beside the boy. Don't you get tired? You ask. He shrugs. Fire sleeps when I do. Then he grins, showing a gap where two front teeth used to be. So I don't. You chuckle, realizing that half the castle's survival rests in the hands of an 8-year-old with more soot than sense. The cook waves a ladle at you. Taste this. Tell me if it's too sour. You accept the bowl she thrusts your way. It's pottage again, barley, onion, a hint of something smoky. You sip, and it tastes better than yesterday's. Somehow, richer. Maybe hunger is the best seasoning after all. Needs salt, you say, trying to sound wise. She cackles. Salt costs more than your boots. You'll eat it as it is. A man by the doorway chuckles, the brewer. Judging by his stained apron and the faint yeasty aroma clinging to him. He's carrying a small keg under one arm and whistling. Speaking of taste, he says, the ale's ready. The cook glares. We don't need everyone drunk before noon. Not drunk, he protests. Hydrated, safer than the well. You raise a brow. Is it really? Oh, certainly, he says with mock gravity. Water breeds worms. Ale breeds happiness. You can't argue with that. You take a mug and sip. It's weak, sour, and slightly warm, but it feels like comfort poured into a cup. As the kitchen hums around you, you realize this is where life actually happens. Not in the great hall. Not in the Lord's chambers. But here, among cooks and servants. Among bubbling pots and laughter that rises above the crackle of fire. You lean against the wall, letting the heat sink into your bones. A cat curls near your feet, purring with the smug assurance of a creature that knows every warm spot in the castle. Someone hums a tune, a soft, circular melody that weaves through the chatter. The cook tosses a bundle of herbs into the cauldron. Rosemary for taste, thyme for luck, she says, and if you've got a cough, stick your face over the steam. Clears the lungs. You follow her advice, leaning into the vapor. It smells earthy and sharp, like medicine disguised as dinner. Your sinuses thank you. She eyes you with amusement. Not bad for a stranger. You've got the look of someone who won't die this winter, not yet. Anyway. That's reassuring, you say dryly. She grins. Don't thank me, thank the fire. The boy by the hearth stirs the coals again, muttering a tune to himself. "Fire's hungry," he says softly. "Always hungry." You watch the flames dance and realize how right he is. The castle lives because this room never sleeps. Every spark here buys another hour of life elsewhere, in the guards' towers, in the cold chambers, even in your own tiny room upstairs. Someone opens the back door to fetch more firewood, and a gust of icy wind sweeps in. Everyone groans. The temperature drops instantly, sharp as a blade. The cook slams the door shut and throws a log into the hearth like she's punishing it. The fire answers with a roar. "That's the thing about warmth," she mutters. "You spend your whole life chasing it, and it's gone the second you blink." You nod slowly, staring into the blaze. There's wisdom in her words, ancient, weary, and utterly true. As you leave the kitchen, the cold finds you again. But this time, you almost welcome it. It reminds you where you've been, a place of noise, heat, and life, and that warmth, like happiness, is most precious when earned. You glance back once at the flickering doorway. Through the smoke and light, you catch the silhouette of the boy still fanning the flames. His small arms move rhythmically, his song rising and falling with the fire. You smile. In a world made of stone and frost, that tiny act, keeping the coals alive, feels like the bravest thing anyone can do. You wake to the sound of shutters banging against stone, the wind's newest game. The castle groans with every gust, a living thing straining under winter's grip. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders and rise from the straw mattress, which crackles in protest. The room feels colder than usual, as if the walls themselves are leaking frost. You approach the narrow window slit. It's rimmed with a thin beard of ice, glinting faintly in the gray dawn. You push the wooden shutter closed, but it doesn't sit flush. A gap the width of your finger lets in a constant whisper of air. You press your palm over it, the cold seeps through immediately, biting deep. You step back and study the wall. The window is simple, a stone opening, fitted with two uneven shutters. No glass, of course. In a wealthy home, you might find a pane of horn, thin, scraped translucent, or perhaps oiled linen stretched tight like skin. But here, in this fortress, practicality wins over luxury. Windows are for watching enemies, not sunsets. You rummage for something to block the draft. A torn scrap of cloth will do. You wedge it into the gap, then hang your spare tunic over the shutter for good measure. It's not perfect, but it softens the hiss of the wind. You think about how strange this must have been for people, living in places designed to keep things out, but that never quite managed to keep comfort in. Light, warmth, air, all precious, all fleeting. Outside, the wind moans again, and you catch a faint rattle from another room. You follow the sound down the corridor. A maid is wrestling with a window, trying to fasten the wooden latch. Her fingers are red and raw, her breath clouding in front of her face. "Stubborn thing," she mutters, then notices you. The hinges freeze shut some nights, then come loose by morning. You offer to help. Together, you push the shutter into place and tie a strip of fabric around the latch. She grins, showing a missing tooth. "That'll hold until the storm changes its mind." She steps back and rubs her hands. "If you're smart, you'll hang a cloth over it. Makes a world of difference." "I already did," You say, proud of your makeshift insulation. She laughs. Then you're learning faster than most. You follow her as she moves through the corridor, checking each window in turn. Doesn't the Lord ever think of fixing these? You ask. She snorts. He spends his winters in the south. We spend ours in drafts. You can't help but smile at her bluntness. The two of you step into a larger chamber, the one overlooking the courtyard. Here, the shutters are reinforced with thick planks, each one lined with strips of hide. A brazier sits near the wall, glowing faintly. The air is a little warmer, though not by much. A young boy sits nearby, polishing armor. His nose is red, his fingers wrapped in cloth. The wind sings, he says dreamily, nodding toward the shutter. When it's angry, it sounds like wolves. You listen, he's right. The wind howls through the narrow gaps, echoing off the stone in long, mournful notes. It does sound alive, wild, hungry, and ancient. The maid crosses herself. Best not to say that out loud. She whispers, superstitions start easy in winter. You smile faintly. Ghosts? Colder than ghosts, she says, colder and less polite. You kneel by the brazier and cup your hands around the faint warmth. It's amazing how a few glowing coals can change everything, how a small fire can make you feel human again. You think of all the ways people fought the cold, tapestries on walls, rushes on floors, shutters, hangings, layered clothes, every trick a small act of rebellion against nature. The maid spreads a cloth along the base of the wall, stuffing the edges with straw. It's not pretty, she says, but it keeps the wind from biting your feet. You help her. Together, you work in silence for a few minutes, sealing invisible cracks, patching what the winter keeps tearing open. Why stay? You finally ask. Why live in a place like this? She shrugs. The castle feeds us, keeps us safe, a roof, a job, a meal, even cold ones. The rest, we endure. She straightens up and grins. Besides, no one dies of boredom here. Frostbite, maybe, but not boredom. You laugh softly. Her humor feels like a small flame in itself, the kind that refuses to die. When you part ways, you linger by the shutter a moment longer, running your fingers along the rough wood. It's scarred and pitted, yet still holding against centuries of wind. You wonder how many winters it's survived, how many faces have stood here, watching snow fall on the same stones. The wind wails again, this time softer, almost like a lullaby. You close your eyes and imagine that it's the castle's voice, old, weary, whispering secrets through the cracks. As you head back down the corridor, you pass a tapestry billowing gently with each gust. You press your hand against it, feeling the air move behind it like breath. Even art, it seems, works overtime here, beauty doubling as insulation. When you return to your room, your improvised shutter holds firm. The cloth flutters slightly but stays in place. The candle flame steadies. You smile in quiet triumph. For the first time since you arrived, the cold doesn't feel like an enemy. It feels like a companion, relentless. Yes, but honest. And you, in your small, flickering corner of this fortress, have learned its language: patch, seal, breathe, endure. The wind outside keens once more. But this time, you don't flinch. You simply pull your cloak tighter. Settle by the fire. and listen to the song of survival playing in the cracks of an ancient wall. The wind on the battlements feels like knives. Even through your cloak, it cuts deep, slicing through fabric, skin, and patience alike. You're standing where no sane person would linger for long, the top of the outer wall, where guards pace back and forth in a slow, endless dance against the cold. From up here, the world is white and gray, the horizon swallowed by snow. The river below has frozen into a dull mirror, reflecting nothing but clouds. Somewhere in the forest beyond, wolves cry, their voices rising like the wind's echo. You pull your hood tighter, though it's a losing battle. The air stings your face, bites your fingers, numbs your ears. Your breath clouds in front of you, only to vanish, devoured by the sky. The guard beside you, an older man with a face like carved oak, stamps his boots. The sound dull against the frozen stone. Keep moving, he says without looking at you. Stop, and you'll freeze faster than a trout in January. You follow his lead, pacing slowly. The parapet stones are slick with frost. Each step feels uncertain, the cold seeping up from the soles of your boots. How long are the shifts, you ask, your voice trembling more from wind than fear. 2 hours, he says, or till your fingers forget your name. Whichever comes first. You chuckle, but the sound is brittle. What keeps you warm? He lifts his gloved hand, showing you a small clay flask tied to his belt. Ale when we've got it. Hope when we don't. Then he grins, a flash of teeth behind his scarf. And straw, lots of straw. You look down at your boots. Straw? He taps his foot, stuffed inside, keeps the blood moving, tricks older than the walls. You nod, filing it away for survival later. The two of you stop near the corner tower, where a brazier burns weakly, lonely glow in the endless gray. The flame crackles, feeding on scraps of wood and, if rumor is true, sometimes dung. The smell confirms the latter. Still, it's heat, and heat doesn't ask questions. The guard kneels to warm his hands, sighing. Most men think this job's about bravery, he says, but bravery doesn't stop frostbite. Timing does. You warm up here every 20 minutes. No more, no less. You crouch beside him, feeling the faint warmth reach your palms. What happens if someone doesn't? He doesn't look at you. They learn the hard way what it feels like to lose a finger. A gust of wind rushes past, scattering ash into the air. You both turn your faces away, blinking. When it settles, the guard stands, back to walking. He says, "Fire makes you soft. The cold reminds you you're alive." You resume pacing along the wall, the snow crunching beneath your boots. The rhythm becomes hypnotic. Step, breath, wind, turn. You start to understand the strange piece of it. There's no noise here but nature's own, no chatter, no music, just the low hum of survival. Below, the courtyard glimmers faintly with torchlight. You can see figures moving, servants hauling water, a groom brushing frost off a horse's back. Even in the depths of winter, life persists in motion. Ever get used to it? You ask. The guard snorts. No one gets used to this. You just get good at pretending you have. He pauses, leaning on his spear, and stares out across the snow. But sometimes, he adds, on a clear night, when the moon hits the ice just right, it's almost beautiful. You follow his gaze. The frozen world stretches out like glass, every surface catching what little light the sky gives. For a moment, the whole landscape looks enchanted, deadly. Yes, but pure. You think of how many centuries people have stood on this same wall, watching the same white silence. A bell rings faintly from the courtyard below. Shift change. The guard pats your shoulder. Time to thaw, traveler. Go find your fire before your nose turns to marble. You grin weakly, following him down the narrow stairwell. The descent feels like moving from sky to earth, from myth to mud. The air grows warmer, or maybe just less cruel. When you reach the base, your legs ache, but your heart feels oddly light. Back inside, the first rush of warmth from the lower corridor hits you like a blessing. You hold your hands out to the wall's torchlight, as if you could absorb it. You realize something you hadn't before. The cold has sharpened you. The warmth feels better because of it. As you walk toward your chamber, the guard's words linger. The cold reminds you you're alive. You think maybe that's what this whole castle is, an elaborate reminder of life against the odds. You reach your door, push it open, and feel the still air inside. The fire is down to embers again, glowing faintly in the hearth. You kneel, feed it fresh kindling, and watch as the flame returns, small at first, then steady, then strong. And for the first time in days, you don't curse the cold. You thank it, because without it, you might never have learned how to truly keep the fire alive. Evening again, the bells ring vespers, their sound echoing across the frozen courtyard. You follow the chime through corridors that glow faintly in torchlight until you reach the great hall, where warmth and hierarchy mix in equal measure. This is the castle's heart, and tonight it beats loud and smoky. The fire in the central hearth blazes, flames twisting like banners in battle. Around it, benches are drawn close, each one a gradient of status. The lord and his family sit nearest the heat, bathed in orange light. Their cloaks shimmer with fur, their cups steam with wine. A few steps farther out, stewards and favored guests hover in the half-warm glow. Beyond them, near the cold shadow of the wall, the servants sit quiet, their faces dim. You take a spot somewhere in the middle, warm enough to feel your fingers, cold enough to remember you're mortal. The hall smells of roasted meat, ale, and the faint, persistent tang of smoke. A bard tunes a lute near the dais, plucking a hesitant melody that fights to be heard over the crackle of the fire. Laughter ripples from the lord's table, sharp and practiced, like a performance. A servant passes with trenchers of bread, and you catch the brief warmth radiating from the loaf before it's gone. Your stomach growls. The fire seems to answer. You notice something curious. The seats closest to the hearth change constantly. A young knight trades spots with a lady. A page sneaks forward with a jug only to linger a few seconds too long, pretending to polish the goblets. Warmth here isn't just about comfort, it's politics. Whoever sits closest to the fire sits closest to power. The steward catches your gaze and smiles faintly. The kind of smile that's seen it all. Seating, he says softly, is the true battle of winter. He gestures discreetly at the corner where dogs sprawl near the flames, their bellies exposed in absolute confidence. They, he adds, always win. You laugh, but he's right. The dogs understand the economy of heat better than any human court. They stretch just far enough to toast their fur. Then roll away when it's too much. Simple. Perfect efficiency. A young serving boy stumbles past, nearly tripping on a rush mat. His pitcher sloshes ale onto the floor. The noble woman nearest him frowns, muttering something about drafts and clumsiness. You see her pull her fur tighter, shifting slightly toward the hearth's light as though distance itself were an insult. At the far end, the Lord raises his cup. To winter, he declares. The hall cheers obediently. He grins. May it kill our enemies faster than our servants. More laughter follows, though you notice the servants don't join in. The bard begins a new tune, soft, lilting, with a warmth that words can't muster. The melody fills the hall, weaving through the smoke. For a moment, the castle feels less like stone and more like song. You sip from your cup, watching the flames dance in the Lord's goblet, in the bard's eyes, in the polished steel of a knight's gauntlet. Heat flickers everywhere except the corners, where the cold lurks, patient as always. A serving girl brings you a small trencher of stew. It's thick, salty, and steaming, liquid gold. You eat slowly, savoring every bit. Around you, conversation swells. Gossip about distant wars. Murmurs about taxes. A debate about whether frost or famine kills more men. Someone nearby jokes. At least Frost doesn't argue. The laughter that follows is half real, half weary. After a while, you stand, needing air. The shift in temperature as you step away from the fire is immediate, a shock. Your breath plumes out like smoke. You walk toward one of the tall windows where the glass, yes, actual glass, rare and rippled, shows only darkness beyond. Your reflection stares back at you, tired, wrapped in shadows. Behind you, the hall continues its ritual. The Lord speaks, the bard sings, servants pour and pour again. The fire burns bright, consuming log after log, each one a piece of forest turned to memory. You think about how, centuries later, people might imagine this moment: noble feasts, laughter, roaring hearths. They won't smell the smoke that chokes your lungs. They won't feel the numb in your toes. They'll picture warmth, not the cost of it. The steward returns, leaning on his staff. Beautiful, isn't it? He says, nodding toward the hearth. But don't be fooled. When the fire dies, they'll all run for their beds like mice. You smile. And you? I make sure the embers stay alive till dawn. He says, somebody has to feed the morning. You watch as he tosses another log into the fire, sparks shooting upward like brief stars. He stands for a moment, backlit by the glow, then nods to you before moving on. You linger a bit longer. The fire snaps, the music softens, the chatter fades to murmurs. You realize that warmth here is more than temperature, it's theater. Habit, hope, each laugh, each toast, each song is a way of convincing the cold that it's already lost. And as you finally retreat toward your own chamber, the sound of the hall follows you down the corridor, fire crackling, dogs sighing, and the low hum of people pretending, for one more night, that stone walls can truly hold off winter. The castle sleeps uneasily when winter deepens. You wake in the dark to the sound of coughing somewhere down the corridor, a deep, wet rasp that echoes like a warning. The air feels heavier tonight. The fire in your hearth burning low, more red than gold. You stir the embers, and a puff of smoke swirls upward before the draft steals it away. You pull on your cloak and step into the hall. The cold there is different, sharper, with a faint scent of mildew and herbs. A figure shuffles toward you, carrying a steaming bowl. "Watch your step," she murmurs. The floor's slick from the melted snow. It's the castle's healer, or something close to it, a woman wrapped in shawls, her arms full of bundles that smell like thyme, vinegar, and smoke. "Someone sick?" you ask. "Half the lower hall," she replies, her voice thin. "Too much damp, too little rest." The cold breeds coughs faster than a priest breeds guilt. You follow her into a small chamber near the kitchens. A brazier glows faintly inside, surrounded by straw mats. 2 guards sit hunched beside it, noses red, eyes watering. One looks up and laughs weakly. "Our Lady of Leeches arrives again," he croaks. "Better leeches than angels," the healer snaps. Setting her bowl down, she unwraps a bundle of herbs and tosses a handful into the hot coals. The air fills with sharp, green smoke that makes your eyes sting. "Breathe it in," she says. "If it doesn't cure you, it'll at least confuse the death spirits long enough for me to find more time." You smile faintly and kneel beside the brazier. The steam curls around your face, carrying a strange comfort. "Does it really help?" you ask. She shrugs. "Sometimes. The warmth helps more. But people believe in herbs. And belief is half the medicine." She opens another pouch, pulls out what looks like crushed flowers, and stirs them into warm water. "Drink," she tells the guards, "and don't ask what it is." They obey, grimacing as they swallow. You can't tell if they feel better or simply distracted from the cold. When she finishes, she wipes her hands on her apron and sits beside you. "The castle's been sick for weeks," she says quietly. "Stone holds damp like a sponge. No chimney draws right, and the cold keeps people huddled close. One cough becomes 10 by morning." "Leeches, herbs, prayers," you murmur. "A whole science of survival." "More like improvisation," she replies. "Real medicine is warmth. The rest is theater." She nods toward the brazier. "We burn rosemary, thyme, and juniper to purify the air. It makes the place smell less like death. Maybe that's enough." You watch her for a moment. Her face is lined, her fingers stained with smoke. "And you?" you ask. "What keeps you well?" She smiles wryly. "Movement, boiling water, and no illusions." The guards chuckle weakly. Ale," one adds. She drinks like a saint on a holiday. The healer laughs. A dry, crackling sound. "Ale is safer than faith," she says. "It never forgets to work." The brazier crackles. You close your eyes for a moment, breathing in the steam. The smell of herbs mixes with smoke, sweat, and human breath. It's not pleasant, but it's alive. You realize this is how survival looks, not clean or heroic, but stubborn and smoky and loud. The healer packs her things, ready to move on. There's a woman in the scullery with frostbite. She mutters. She tried to fetch water barehanded. People always think they can outsmart the cold. She glances at you, her expression softening. "Don't make that mistake, traveler." You nod. "I'll try not to." When she leaves, you stay by the brazier a little longer, staring into the embers. You remember stories from your own world, tales of medieval cures. The strange balance between faith and guesswork. But here, it isn't superstition, it's necessity. Every poultice, every prayer, every superstition is one more way to convince yourself the body can win. You rise slowly and step back into the corridor. The air feels cleaner, if only because it's colder. Somewhere above, a bell tolls midnight. The castle creaks and sighs. Restless in its sleep, you pass the door to your chamber but keep walking, drawn by the faint glow of another brazier down the hall. A lone guard sits there, rubbing his hands together, his face pale in the firelight. "Leeches again?" he asks as you approach. "No," you say, "just looking for warmth." He nods and scoots over. "Sharing the glow. That's all any of us are doing," he says quietly. The two of you sit in silence. The fire hissing softly. The smoke rises. The wind moans outside, and the world contracts to this small, flickering circle of heat. Somewhere deep in the walls, water drips rhythmically, a reminder that life goes on, drop by drop, even in the coldest fortress. By morning, the castle smells faintly of ash, boiled herbs, and something less pleasant. You follow the odor down a narrow corridor and find its source: the garderobe tower, the medieval answer to plumbing and the coldest place in the entire fortress. A servant is standing outside, clutching a bucket and grimacing. "Best wait your turn," he says, his breath fogging in the air. "Wind's wrong direction this morning." You give a weak laugh. "There's a right direction?" He nods solemnly. "When the breeze comes off the moat instead of down it." You hesitate. He shrugs, stepping aside. "Well, good luck, traveler. Don't breathe too deep." The door creaks open, and a wave of frigid air escapes, tinged with an unmistakable sourness. The garderobe chamber is a stone alcove jutting over the moat, barely larger than a closet. A hole in a wooden bench serves its grim purpose. The wind rushes up from below, howling through the shaft like a ghost trying to escape. You step inside carefully. The walls are coated in frost, glistening faintly in the weak daylight that filters through a narrow slit. You can hear water, sluggish, half frozen, lapping far below. This, you think, is medieval efficiency at its most honest. You shiver, your eyes watering. Every draft feels like punishment. The cold makes even breathing an ordeal. How anyone survives long enough in here to do their business is a marvel of human determination. Someone once told you that castles built garderobes over moats so waste would be carried away by water. Standing here, you wonder how well that ever worked in winter. When the moat turned to ice, you glance down the hole and see a crust of frost glinting where the current should be. You decide not to think too hard about it. When you step back out into the corridor, the servant is waiting with lime powder and a small shovel. To keep the smell down, he explains cheerfully, also keeps demons from nesting. "Demons?" you ask, amused. He grins. "Anything that stinks that bad must be evil." You can't argue with his theology. Further down the hall, another servant hauls a wooden chamber pot toward a side door. Trying not to spill, he tips it into a trough, then pours a scoop of ashes over the residue. The air is so cold that steam rises immediately, a sight both revolting and oddly impressive. Everything freezes solid after a few hours. He says proudly, "So we just chip it out come spring." You blink. "You mean it stays?" He nods. Until the thaw. You stand there, stunned by the thought of an entire winter's worth of frozen humanity waiting beneath the castle. Medieval spring cleaning, you mutter. The servant laughs. Aye, you'll smell it before you see it. You follow him outside briefly. Through a side passage that opens near the outer wall. The moat below is indeed frozen. A pale sheet of ice reflecting the gray sky. A few ravens pick at the edges. Their black feathers stark against the white. The smell drifts faintly upward even through the cold. Proof that nature doesn't negotiate. You turn away quickly. Back into the warmth of the inner halls, or at least the relative warmth. Near the kitchen door, a maid scrubs a collection of chamber pots. Her hands red from the icy water. We mix in vinegar, she tells you, noticing your grimace. Keeps the air fresh. You raise an eyebrow. Fresh? She grins. By castle standards. Nearby, another woman tosses dried herbs, lavender, mint, rosemary, onto the rushes spread across the floor. The air fills with a brief burst of fragrance. Fighting a losing war against centuries of damp stone and humanity. Still, it helps. The scent reminds you of something civilized. Something soft. As the day stretches on, you notice how the routines around sanitation are as ritualized as prayer, ashes, herbs, lime, water. Repeat. It's all part of the rhythm of survival. A careful balance between endurance and acceptance. By mid-afternoon, you find yourself back in the main hall. A group of servants are laughing over a story. Something about a knight whose armor froze solid during a siege. He couldn't move for 2 hours. One said even his pride went numb. You laugh with them, because laughter feels like warmth. In a place where every comfort must be earned. Humor is the closest thing to luxury. That night, you light your own candle early. The smell of vinegar still lingering faintly in the corridors. You think about the strange intimacy of this world, how nothing, not even necessity, is private. The cold breaks down barriers as easily as it breaks skin. As you lie down, the fire's glow flickering across the ceiling. You realize that even the least glamorous corners of this castle tell the same story. Every act, every habit, every chore is about keeping decay and cold at bay. It's not just a fortress against enemies. It's a fortress against nature itself. And somehow, that feels almost noble. You wake to a strange, hollow quiet, the kind that only follows a long night of snow. The castle feels muffled, as though the world itself is holding its breath. Even your footsteps sound soft as you move through the corridor. The stone floor dusted with a faint shimmer of frost that must have crept in under the doors. When you reach the courtyard, you see why everything sounds different. The well is frozen solid. A circle of pale ice covers its mouth. The rope stiff with frost. The bucket frozen halfway in its descent. A boy stands beside it, kicking at the rim with his boot. Won't give, he mutters. His breath curls in white clouds. He looks up at you and shrugs. No water today. Then, you walk closer. What do you do when the well freezes? Pray for fire, he says, dead serious. It's not far from the truth. Water is life here, and in winter it becomes another enemy. Without it, cooking slows, washing stops, and thirst begins to gnaw at everyone in quiet, desperate ways. A few servants are already at work, hacking at the ice with iron rods. Each strike rings through the courtyard, echoing off the walls like a dull bell. Splinters of ice fly in every direction, glittering like glass. One of them pauses, wiping her brow with a gloved hand. We melt snow. Mostly, she tells you, takes a mountain to fill a single bucket. You glance at the pile of snow beside her, already half melted in a great iron pot over a small fire. The water inside is cloudy, flecked with soot. She laughs at your expression. We strain it through cloth after. It's clean enough if you're thirsty enough. The fire crackles weakly, struggling against the cold. You notice how they've built it inside a small pit lined with stone. Shielded from the wind, every movement here feels calculated, learned from generations who had no choice but to master the season. A man approaches with 2 buckets of half-frozen water, the handles biting into his hands. The river still runs near the bend. He says, "Thin ice there. Risky, though." "Risky?" you ask. He grins, teeth chattering. "Fall in once and you'll stop worrying about warmth forever." You shudder, imagining it, the shock, the silence, the river closing over like a lid. You wonder how many bodies the water below this castle has claimed over the centuries. Back inside, the kitchen is buzzing with activity again. You find the cook boiling water in enormous pots, her sleeves rolled to her elbows. "We'll need to ration," she says. "No washing till tomorrow." "Not even hands?" a maid protests. "Hands, yes. Faces, if you must. Anything else, wait till spring." The room fills with laughter. Thin but real. The cook smirks. "Besides, dirt's warmer than soap." You realize she isn't entirely joking. Soap freezes, after all, and water's a luxury. Cleanliness must bow to survival. Later, you help carry pails of melted snow to a small trough near the stables. The horses stamp and snort as they drink greedily, steam rising from their nostrils. One of the stable hands pats a mare's flank. "They hate the cold worse than we do," he says, "but at least they can't complain." "Lucky them," you reply, rubbing your numb fingers. He chuckles. "If you stay here long enough, you'll learn not to complain either. Doesn't change the weather." As the day wears on, the air thickens again with frost. The well remains sealed, the rope stiff, the bucket trapped mid-fall like a relic of defiance. The castle adjusts its rhythm, less washing, less cooking, more patience. Buckets of snow appear in every corner, slowly melting by the fires. Proof that persistence can substitute for abundance. By dusk, the corridors glow faintly from candlelight reflecting off icy walls. You pass a servant placing a clay bowl near a brazier, carefully thawing the edges of a frozen rag. "For drinking?" you ask. "For mending," she says. "Hot water loosens thread, cold snaps it." Even the act of sewing, it seems, bends to the will of winter. When you finally return to your room, the fire in your hearth is nearly out. You kneel to revive it, using the smallest sticks first. As the flames catch, you think of the well, the snow, the frozen bucket suspended like time itself. You picture the people outside, still hacking, still hauling, still believing that water will come because it must. The fire grows stronger, crackling softly. You stare into it and realize something small but certain. Life in this castle endures not because of warmth, but because of motion. Nothing, neither water, nor breath, nor hope, stays still for long. Outside, the wind rises again, but this time, you listen differently. It's not a threat, it's a reminder that the world may freeze, but it never truly stops. The thaw never comes suddenly. It starts with sound, tiny, hesitant drips from the ceiling, the faint gurgle of water returning to life somewhere deep within the walls. You wake to that rhythm, drip, pause, drip, the kind of rhythm that means both relief and trouble. The air smells different too. Less sharp, more alive, though still heavy with stone and smoke. You stretch, your body stiff from weeks of sleeping under too many layers. The fire in your hearth has burned low again. But this time the cold doesn't bite as deeply. There's a softness to it, a hint that winter might be tiring of its own cruelty. Down in the courtyard, the snow has turned gray and slushy. You step carefully over the uneven patches, boots sinking with soft squelches. The sound is almost musical after months of silence. But the servants look less pleased. The thaw, it turns out, brings its own kind of war. A man is already shouting near the gatehouse. "We'll lose the grain if the cellar floods again." Another curses as he lifts a barrel. Water leaking from its seams. Meltwater runs in small rivulets down the cobblestones, gathering in low spots like forgotten ghosts of the moat. You follow the noise to the storage rooms below the kitchen. The air there is thick and wet, walls sweating as though the castle itself is feverish. A group of workers kneel around the grain sacks, piling them on wooden boards to keep them off the damp floor. The scent of mildew hangs heavy. The steward spots you and sighs. Spring is the cold's revenge. He says, "What doesn't freeze, it soaks." He gestures toward the doorway, where buckets line the wall. Every hour we haul water out. Every hour, it comes back. You pick up a bucket and join in. The water is icy, seeping through your gloves. It feels endless, as though the castle is crying from the inside. When the last bucket is emptied, the steward leans on his staff. "We'll salt the floor," he mutters. "Keep the rot from taking hold." He glances at the ceiling, where droplets still hang like glass beads. Of course, the roof leaks too, but one miracle at a time. Outside, the cook stands near the doorway, arms folded. "We've got sacks of salt," she says, "but they're worth more than bread these days." "Without salt," the steward replies, "the meat rots. Then there's no bread or supper." They trade weary smiles, the kind born from long winters and short tempers. You realize that everything here, food, fire, even patience, must be rationed carefully, or the whole system collapses. Later, you walk toward the storeroom that holds the castle's preserved goods. It smells like an odd mixture of smoke, vinegar, and desperation. Rows of barrels stand against the wall, marked with chalk: fish, pork, ale, vinegar, salt. A boy is hammering lids tighter while another brushes a crust of frost from one barrel's rim. "How long does this last?" you ask. "Till it doesn't," the boy says without looking up. "Salt keeps the meat good for months, if the rats don't get to it first." You glance down. Sure enough, small black pellets scatter near the base of the wall. You can almost hear faint skittering behind the barrels. The boy catches your look and grins grimly. "They say the rats never freeze," he says. "Smart beasts. They know where the warmth hides." You help him push a barrel back into place. The wood slick beneath your hands. The weight of it reminds you of how much survival depends on such dull, heavy things: salt, grain, ale. No heroics, just maintenance. By midday, the thaw has reached the outer walls. The moat crackles as its ice begins to split. You walk to the battlements and look down. The water beneath shines like tarnished silver. Broken patches of ice drifting lazily downstream. A guard beside you sighs. Soon the mud'll be worse than the snow. He's right. The ground below already churns under the hooves of restless horses. The air smells of wet hay and iron. The first true warmth of the season clings to everything, uncomfortable in its novelty. As the sun lowers, the courtyard grows louder again: buckets, boots, barking dogs. But there's laughter too, awkward and cautious, as though people are remembering how. Someone splashes another with a pail of meltwater, someone else curses, then laughs anyway. You realize you're smiling. The sound of it, laughter in the thaw, feels like proof that the castle, for all its damp misery, is still alive. When night comes, you sit by your fire again. The walls drip softly. The flames hiss with moisture. It's not the steady warmth of deep winter's fires, but a fragile, flickering thing that mirrors the world outside. You stretch your hands toward the light and think of the grain safe above the salted floor. The meat barrels sealed tight. The rats waiting for their chance. The balance will hold, barely, until the true spring arrives. And as you close your eyes, you realize this: survival here isn't just about resisting the cold. It's about enduring the aftermath, the thaw, the rot, the noise, and the mud. All the messy reminders that warmth, like life itself, always comes with a price. The thaw has settled into full surrender now. Where there was silence, there is dripping. Where there was ice, there is mud. The world outside the walls is soft, brown, and loud. The sound of hooves squelching, of boots sticking, of dogs barking as if reborn. Inside the castle, the mood shifts too. The fires burn smaller, no longer desperate, just habitual. People move differently, faster, lighter, as if remembering that motion can mean something other than survival. But winter isn't quite gone, it's simply loosened its grip. You can still feel its breath along the corridors, patient and faintly amused. Then one morning, the bell rings 3 times instead of 2. The rhythm is wrong. You follow the sound to the great hall, where the steward stands by the hearth, his face drawn. The watchman saw smoke on the horizon. He says, "A siege train, maybe, or raiders taking advantage of the thaw." The word siege cuts through the warmth like an axe. Around you, the castle begins its ancient dance: doors barred, supplies counted, guards doubled, and suddenly, the long winter feels like a rehearsal for something much colder. You help carry barrels from the storerooms up to the hall: salted meat, ale, grain. The air fills with the smell of work, wood, sweat, old iron. A boy trips, scattering peas across the floor. No one laughs. In the courtyard, men roll stones to the wall edges, ready for defense. Archers oil their bowstrings, muttering about damp ruining the draw. The moat, half melted, glimmers with thin ice that cracks under thrown debris. If they come tonight, one guard says, "We'll have more mud than moat." The steward grimaces. Mud slows them, and us. Evening falls early under the weight of new clouds. The fires in the hall are fed again, this time as much for morale as for heat. The Lord's chair sits empty, he's atop the battlements, scanning the horizon. You climb up after supper, breath frosting as you step into the wind. From here, the world looks endless and uncertain. Smoke curls faintly in the distance, a thin black line against gray sky. Maybe just a village burning. A guard murmurs. His attempt at comfort fails. You look around. Every face is pale, lips chapped, eyes tired but alert. The months of cold have built something in them. Endurance forged by necessity. They stand straighter now. The same people who shivered through endless nights by smoky fires. The winter trained them for this. Back in the hall, people gather in tighter clusters. Someone begins a story to drown out the wind. An old tale about a siege long ago. When the castle's kitchen fire burned so hot it cracked the stones. They boiled snow and hope, the storyteller says, and somehow it kept them alive. Laughter follows, not loud, but real. Someone strums a lute, the same slow melody you heard weeks ago. The sound wraps around the room, softening the edges of fear. Later, you slip away to the corridor by your chamber. The air is thick with tension and the faint sweetness of wood smoke. You sit by your fire, listening. Outside, the wind carries faint shouts, guards calling shifts. Dogs barking, the ring of a hammer on frozen metal. You think of all the small things that kept the castle alive through the cold. The moss in the cracks. The wool and straw, the endless feeding of fire. A siege is only a winter of a different kind. You look at your hands. Calloused now, faintly burned from carrying logs and buckets. You smile. The body remembers what the mind forgets. That survival is mostly repetition. Hours pass. The shouting quiets. The fire burns low again. You imagine the guards on the wall stamping their feet, whispering to stay awake. Maybe one hums to himself. The same low tune the kitchen boy used to feed the flames. Maybe the same wind that once froze you now keeps the torches alive. You realize that fear and cold aren't so different, they both demand warmth in return. And as you lie back on your straw bed, you wonder whether the real war isn't out there beyond the walls, but here inside them, between the heart and the chill that keeps testing it. Sleep comes slowly. Outside, the wind rises, carrying the first hints of snow again, one last insult from winter before spring claims the field. Morning breaks under a bruised sky. The cold has returned, not the deep, unending kind of midwinter, but the sharp, nervous chill that comes before something worse. The air smells of wet earth and smoke. Somewhere in the distance, a horn sounds once, then again. You climb the stairs to the battlements. The horizon burns faintly. The guard was right, there's smoke. More now than yesterday. It drifts above the trees in lazy, dark ribbons, rising from the north where the road cuts through the forest. Below you, the courtyard hums with controlled panic. Barrels rolled tight, animals herded into the lower bailey, children sent to the chapel. The cold is a gift now. It keeps hands steady, minds sharp. Men stamp their boots, not to warm them, but to remind themselves they're still flesh, not fear. You stand beside the captain of the guard, a broad man whose beard is white with frost. They'll reach us by nightfall, he says, eyes on the smoke. Mud will slow them, but not stop them. He gestures to the walls. These stones have seen worse. So have we. You want to believe him. By noon, the wind shifts. The smell of fire grows stronger, mixing with the iron tang of the moat's thawed water. Archers line the parapets, testing bowstrings that creak like old wood. Servants haul baskets of arrows, pots of pitch. Even the kitchen lends its fires, great black cauldrons of boiling oil, bubbling ominously. The cook catches your glance and snorts. For defense, she says, not dinner. Pity, you reply, it smells better than the stew. She laughs, short and sharp. You keep your humor. You keep your heat. By evening, the world narrows to torchlight and the sound of clanking chains as the drawbridge rises. The air outside is quiet, but thick with promise. The castle exhales one last plume of smoke before sealing itself off from the night. Inside, everyone moves carefully, as though afraid to wake the walls. Fires are stoked higher, not for comfort but for courage. Shadows dance like nervous soldiers across the ceilings. The Lord walks among his men, offering nods instead of speeches. The time for words is long past. You retreat to the great hall, where the warmth feels borrowed, the air heavy with fear disguised as routine. The bard plays softly again, same tune, slower now, the notes trembling in the air. You sit near the fire. Across from you, a young squire sharpens his dagger by the light. He looks barely 16, his hands shaking. You offer him a small smile. First siege? He nods, eyes wide. You? You think for a moment. Every winter is a siege. You say. He blinks, then laughs quietly. The tension breaks. Just a little. Outside, the horn sounds again, closer this time. The hall goes still. The fire pops loudly, as if startled. The Lord's voice rises from the far end of the room, calm, measured, rehearsed. To your posts. The great doors open, and a gust of freezing air sweeps through, scattering sparks and prayers alike. You pull your cloak tight and follow the flow of people back toward the battlements. The wind hits harder up top. You peer over the wall and see movement, tiny lanterns flickering like insects in the dark. Figures, dozens of them, wading through the mud toward the outer gate. The guard beside you mutters a curse. Idiots picked a fine time to fight mud and stone. Another guard grins, teeth flashing in the torchlight. At least they'll die warm. The captain raises a hand, and the torches along the wall dim one by one. The castle's light shrinks until it becomes a single ember, the great hall's hearth glowing faintly through the cracks. Everything else is dark, waiting, listening. And then, the first arrow arcs across the night. It hisses through the air and shatters against the wall. Harmless, almost polite. The second comes closer. Then the third. Within moments, the sky fills with them. Black feathers slicing the cold. You duck instinctively as a shaft splinters against the parapet beside you. Hold, the captain bellows. Wait for sight. The attack as torches flicker, growing brighter as they near the gate. The castle responds in kind, arrows loosed, oil poured, stones rolled. The noise becomes a single, living roar, metal, fire, screams, and wind all mixing together. For a moment, it feels like the castle itself is alive again, its old heart beating in defiance. When it's over, The world is quieter. Smoke drifts along the battlements. The mud below is littered with broken wood and darker things. The captain exhales slowly. That was the test, he says. They'll wait for dawn now. You nod, though your ears still ring. Your hands still tremble. Somewhere below, a dog barks once, then falls silent. The guards start to laugh, quiet, weary, relieved, still breathing. One says, "Still cold." Another answers. You smile faintly. The castle holds. For now. You look out into the darkness, toward the faint line of the horizon where the fires still glow. And as the wind rises again, carrying the smell of wood smoke and snow, you think how fitting it is. The same cold that almost killed you all winter now shields you from your enemies. The frost, the stone, the endless breath of the season, it's not your adversary anymore. It's your armor. Dawn comes gray and trembling, as if the sky itself hesitates to wake. The wind still howls across the battlements, but softer now, less like a blade, more like breath. You open your eyes to the faint warmth of a dying fire and the heavier warmth of being alive. Below, the courtyard is a ruin of mud and silence. Smoke drifts from the outer wall, curling upward in lazy spirals. The air smells of wet wood, iron, and the faint sweetness of ash. Someone coughs nearby, a raw, human sound that feels more sacred than any hymn. You rise slowly, your body stiff, your cloak stiff with frost. The first light spills through a narrow slit in the wall, catching the motes of ash that still float like snow. It paints everything silver, armor, stone, faces too tired to celebrate. The captain of the guard stands near the parapet, leaning on his spear. His voice, when he speaks, is almost gentle. They're gone, left before sunrise, took what they could carry, burned what they couldn't. You glance beyond the walls. The forest smolders faintly, black scars running through the white. Will they come back, you ask? He shrugs. Maybe, but not today. He smiles then, small, weary, but real. Funny thing about surviving, he says, it never feels like victory. Just quiet. You stand beside him, listening to that quiet. It's not the silence of fear anymore. It's the heavy stillness that follows endurance. Somewhere below, someone starts laughing, ragged, exhausted, but alive. The castle begins to move again, slow as thawing ice. Buckets of water are fetched. Fires coaxed back to strength. The wounded tended. The rhythm of survival returns like breath after drowning. In the great hall, the cook is already at her cauldron, stirring something that smells like barley and hope. "We'll eat well tonight," she says when she sees you, if only despite the cold. You sit near the hearth as she works. The fires glow softer now, no longer a desperate blaze but a patient pulse. The servants drift in one by one, some limping, some laughing. Someone starts to hum, another joins, then another. It's not a song you know, but it feels ancient, worn smooth by centuries of need. You close your eyes. The sound wraps around you like a blanket. Later, as dusk falls again, you climb once more to the ramparts. The air is still frigid, but no longer cruel. The snow glows faintly in the fading light, soft and forgiving. The wind carries the distant hoot of an owl, the first sound of the world beyond the walls daring to live again. You rest your hands on the cold stone, tracing the grooves cut by time and weather. Every mark tells the same story: survival, persistence, patience. The castle doesn't win against winter, it outlasts it. So do the people inside. So, somehow, do you. You think of the first night you arrived, shivering by a reluctant fire, wondering how anyone could live like this. Now, as the cold presses against your face, you understand. You don't defeat the cold. You make peace with it. You learn its habits, respect its silence, borrow its strength. Behind you, the great hall door creaks open. Warmth spills out, orange, flickering, alive. Someone calls your name faintly, inviting you back in, but for a moment longer. You stay, breathing in the still air, watching the moon rise over the melting snow. The wind brushes your cheek, no longer biting, just a whisper, the same whisper that has moved through this place for centuries. You let it pass through you, not as an enemy, but as a teacher. Because here, in this cold medieval castle, survival was never about winning, it was about learning how to keep living in spite of everything. You smile faintly, eyes half closed, and whisper back to the wind, "I understand now." The moon climbs higher, the fires below burn steady. The walls, scarred and weary, hold fast once more. And somewhere deep in the heart of the castle, the last breath of winter finally exhales. End of script. Sweet dreams.